So this is a sociological review webinar on the topic of internationalization, peer review, and editorial work behind the scenes of the journal. It's the first of 4 webinars this month, with the next session offering a glimpse behind the scenes of the Sociological Review monograph. There will be another seminar a week after that on academic judgment, and there will be a final session on responding to reviewer feedback towards the end of July. So my name is Daryl Martin, and I'll be hosting this session. I lecture in sociology at the University of York in the UK, and I'm also one of the general editors of the Sociological Review, where I have responsibilities in the area of internationalization. So we'll be joined today by Dr. Wes Lynn from the University of Warwick in the UK. Wes is the editor-in-chief of the Sociological Review journal. We'll also be joined by Dr. Kaoru Takahashi from Kogakuin University in Japan. Kaoru is the managing editor of the Sociological Review journal. And we'll also be joined by Dr. Bo Chen from the National Kaohsiung Normal University in Taiwan. Bo is one of the editorial board members of the Sociological Review journal, and he's previously been on the editorial board of Gender and Society, a journal which I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with. So in terms of the format of today's webinar, we're going to begin with an introduction by Wes to the Sociological Review's internationalization strategies. And he's going to talk for approximately 5 minutes about these strategies, what we mean by internationalization in the journal, and how internationalization is really integral to the ethos of our journal. We'll then move on to a short talk by Kaoru, who will give some information about publication trends in the journal. She'll also give some sense of data on article submissions to the journal, and also the makeup of the editorial board and how we're trying to address this issue of internationalization from the makeup of our editorial board members. Next, I will myself talk very, very briefly about internationalization in the editorial and the peer review process. So I'll try to take you behind the scenes just a little bit in terms of explaining how editors aim to encourage authors to position their work internationally, and how editors and reviewers use the peer review process itself to develop this aspect of the work we publish. And after this, we will explore internationalization from another very important perspective on the journal, the perspective of editorial board members. And here Bo will draw on his experience to really kind of talk about how to write for an international audience and why it's important to do so. And he'll talk about the perspective of authors and also reviewers. So that will probably take us to about 1:30 in terms of the first 30 minutes of this webinar. And after this, we're going to kind of have a more question and answer session in which I'm going to ask each of our panelists to reflect on a number of questions about what internationalization means to them, what they think the barriers are for editors who are trying to ensure internationalization within the review process, and also what's the most challenging aspect of reviewing papers outside of the cultural context within which they know best. So those are questions that I'd be interested, we're all interested in your opinions of too. So we'll ask you to contribute by maybe answering some of your kind of questions or offering comments in the chat. And we will monitor the chat in the second half of the webinar, and we will use that as a prompt for wider discussions. So I hope that you find the conversation interesting. I hope you find it illuminating. And I really do encourage you to ask questions via the chat function as we go along. Okay, so let's make a start substantively by moving to Wes Lynn. So Wes, from his perspective as editor-in-chief, is going to be talking about the Sociological Review's internationalization strategies and how internationalization is key to the ethos of the journal. So Wes, over to you.
Thanks, Daryl. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us, attending today's webinar on internationalization and peer review. And I hope that through this webinar and a series webinar after this event, we'll be able to demystify our editorial work behind the scene, and also encourage you to participate and to engage with activities within our journal, and hopefully we can see more international editorial board members joining our journal. So as a UK-based journal, the Sociological Review is committed to internationalization and EDI as ethos of the journal and what we promote as an organization. So in 2020, let me see if I can, yes. So in 2020, we set up a working group to develop and launch our internationalization strategy for the journal, aiming to engage with a wider international sociological community and readership, and to continue to develop our global presence and to widen our international scholarship and impact of our publication and our service to education globally. So this is our ethos of internationalization and EDI within our journal. I remember that as soon as we started our discussion within the working group on internationalization strategy and what we mean by internationalization, we face a big challenge to define, the definition of internationalization. And we're asking ourselves, is it about, the author's institutional affiliation, or is it about the area and region of their research? Our international readership, our approach to knowledge production in terms of theoretical and methodological intervention from the global south, or is it about internationalization of our social life in light of globalization, or is it about all of them? It's not an easy answer, and we realize soon after that the above might all play an important part in our vision of internationalization. And in developing our vision of internationalization, we might initially like to expand our global reach regarding our publication and readership. However, our discussion on internationalization also have shifted from the focus on expanding our international scholarship in terms of submission and readership to more critical reflection on some philosophical debate on how we can achieve this end and its implication to our vision to the future of sociology. And more importantly, we hope the Sociological Review will serve as an inclusive platform and to engage with and celebrate the global production of knowledge through sociological imagination. I understand later in our webinar that we have a Q&A discussion on what does internationalization mean to you. And we welcome our global audience to share your understanding of internationalization and help us continue to reflect on our vision for internationalization. But now I'm going to lay out, our understanding and our vision of internationalization for the journal. So there are three key parts, constituted our internationalization vision and strategy. The first is about global footprint. So we aim to extend the global footprint of our activities regarding submission, publication, usage, and citation. And this also includes our strategy of expanding our editorial board member internationally. For example, in light of our successful recruitment of international editorial board member last year, we will launch another call for editorial board member worldwide this summer. So please stay in tune. And we very much welcome your application to join our editorial board. The second aspect of our internationalization strategies is on global knowledge. And I understand that Daryl will talk a bit more in detail later on. So basically, we aim to enhance the internationalization of discussion on social life and public engagement with global knowledge. And we are particularly committed to make a contribution to the study of a new frontier of sociological research with a global outlook, and to highlight the significance of the term global beyond a reductive geographical, regional, national categorization and subject discipline. And we also aim to explore multiple ways of approaching the internationalization of social life with a sociological imagination theoretically and methodologically. Thirdly, our next aspect of internationalization is global future scholarship. And this has always been the ethos of the Sociological Review, and the Sociological Review Foundation is to nurture a new generation of international scholarship. So as a leading international journal, we have committed to nurture a new generation of international sociologists with a global outlook and their field of inquiry. And we will build on our success of existing initiatives and activities to support early career researchers. In particular, we are committed to develop an inclusive infrastructure that will enable us to support early career researchers from the global south in the early publication and to publish most innovative studies. So this is the vision that has been developed through our internationalization strategy. So I pass on to Kaoru to talk about some statistics, some figures about our internationalization submission, submission from the global audience and readership and authors. Kaoru.
Thank you, Wes. Let me share my screen. So, yeah, here. So, hi everyone. My name is Kaoru. I've been working as an editorial manager for the Sociological Review for 3 years now, and now, today, so my main work is to communicate with authors, editorial team, external reviewers, and publishers to monitor if all submissions and reviewing process are going well. So I'm a person in behind the scene, but also I'm a person with the most contact with both authors and reviewers. So today I briefly introduce some data to give you an idea about what we do internationalization from a publication side. So this slide shows our kind of submission data. So during this report period, and actually almost every year, we receive nearly between 350 to 400 submissions. So this report period, we have received nearly 400 papers, and actually most of them, so nearly 300 papers are the first submissions. But when it comes to the decision, so unfortunately, nearly half of the new submissions are disk rejected. And disk reject means the papers are not sent for peer review, so this rejected by the editor's assessment. And I often see that quite a lot of international authors' papers are disk rejected, and there are mainly two reasons. On the one hand, that is, and there is any issue with formatting, and the other issue is there is something with kind of argument. I'm sure this will be further developed with my colleagues later. So, but I feel that disk reject could kind of avoidable disk reject, because if the authors are carefully refer to our submission guidelines, also familiarize enough with our past issues and aims and scope, and also we have a manifest in our website, and I'm sure some international authors, including myself, don't know which journal to submit. So that's why such kind of disk reject could happen. So what I would like to advise for international author here is it would be really good or best to look into aims and scope and manifesto and submission guideline beforehand. Then I think you could avoid the percentage of disk reject. And next, so this is, so during this report period, about 60 papers were accepted for the publication. And this is a breakdown of the authors' affiliation of where the authors are based by their countries. So as you can see, nearly half of the authors whose papers are accepted are based in UK. But I just would like to highlight here, so it's not representing for their nationality. So actually, within these UK-based authors, there are some authors from Asia and South America. So there are quite diverse cultural background authors are included here. And even though there are more authors from English-speaking country, but it's getting more diverse now. So that is why we really want to encourage international authors to submit papers. And according to the information provided by SAGE, which is our publisher, the Sociological Review Journal is subscribed by more than 5,000 institutions all over the world, and only 37% are based in UK, so which means we have a quite wider readership internationally. So this is also why we are not publishing a paper just for UK authors or UK readers, but for readers all over the world. So we really want to have more diverse, we really want to have more submission from authors from different parts of the world. And lastly, so this is a break. So we currently have 62 editorial board members, and this is also breakdown of their by their country, where each editorial board members are based. So as you can see here again, more than half of our editorial board members are based in UK. But also we have been, as Wes mentioned earlier, so we have been really keen on expanding our editorial board internationally, and through our last year's recruitment, we have now some members based in Asia and Africa. And what I think this will also further again developed by our colleagues later, but what we want to do through our reviewing process is not reproducing existing knowledge, which is more westernized perspective, and instead having such internationalized editorial boards, we want to encourage our authors to more, how can I say, situate their argument in international context to build up new contributions that couldn't be achieved in a past conventional reviewing process that could be used, that you could use to be more westernized, Western-dominated editorial board. So that's why really we are keen on expanding our editorial board internationally. So as Wes announced earlier, we are planning to open our call for new editorial board members sometime very soon. So if you are interested in joining us, please keep checking our latest information by following our social media and following us on SNS. So I think that's from me as some giving basic information from administrative side. So now I'm sure Daryl is going to talk more about more reviewing strategical side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kaoru. I'm going to just see if I can share my screen. Bear with me a second. Okay, can everyone see the beginning of my PowerPoint? Thank you very much. Now I'm going to say a few words about internationalization in the editorial and the peer review process. Just try and take you behind the scenes a little bit, just a little bit, in order to explain how editors try to work with authors and reviewers throughout this peer review process to try and make sure that we're publishing work with a global outlook, to try and ensure that we're developing new forms of the sociological imagination in all the work that we do, which is international in scope. So, sorry, bear with me a second. Yeah, one of the journal's key strategic aims, as mentioned by Wes in his introduction, is that the work that we publish should enhance the internationalization of discussion on social life and public engagement with global knowledge. And we do try to use the peer review process to advance this aim. So what this means in practice is that we support publication of research that offers insights on the challenges of global relevance. So for example, issues of inequality or issues of social justice or issues of sustainability, they are all global in scope and in scale. And we do want our authors to try and position their particular analysis within these much wider debates. And we do try and achieve this at numerous stages of the article handling process. So I'm going to take you through 3 stages in the next few slides. So pre-submission, so maybe the work that you as authors can do in order to position your work internationally. Stage 2, I'll talk you through the peer review process. And stage 3, what happens at the stage of acceptance for publication. So as an editor, I see it as really part of my role to try and embed our vision of internationalization of knowledge production throughout the peer review process. And I'd like to see that happening from the earliest stage. So pre-submission and what you can do as an author to try and help with that. A large percentage of our papers, as Kaoru's slides made clear, are desk rejected, which means that they are rejected without moving out to peer review. And very often this is because the papers we see at initial stage have not really articulated their very specific case studies with respect to wider international set of debates. Also importantly, they haven't necessarily positioned their findings with reference to previous articles and arguments and debates within the sociological review. So this is probably the single issue that means that papers get desk rejected at an unfortunately early stage. And it's the single issue that I think could really help in terms of getting more papers through to review stage by external reviewers. So when submitting your research, I would say to you as authors, please make sure that you have read the Sociological Review's Journal's Manifesto in order to gain a sense for the type of work that we publish, that we have published in the past and that we want to publish in the future. And when you frame your paper, when you introduce your paper, do make it explicit as to how your research connects with previous studies published in the journal. This doesn't mean that you need to dilute the very specific case study or your findings in your paper, but it does mean that you should try and build in, alongside that specificity, a greater awareness of your own positionality as a researcher in wider circuits of knowledge production and how your findings connect with much, much wider findings in the sociological literature. But please do read the journal's manifesto. There are a number of journals with Sociological Review in their title. So the American Sociological Review, the Polish Sociological Review. We're all different, and do read our manifesto for what our journal kind of means by the research that it wants to publish. So if your paper clears this initial stage of editorial assessment, where we look at the fit within our journal in particular and look at the aims and scope of our journals as against your potential contribution, then I invite external reviewers to assess your paper. So the reviewers will typically be a combination of subject specialists in your areas, and also members of the editorial board will be invited just to make sure that the research of all our papers is relevant to a wide journal readership. So do remember to, as well as addressing very specific kind of areas of study and experts, that your work has to translate to a wider journal readership. I will also aim to invite reviewers with a knowledge of the local, or the national, or the regional context within which your study is located. But because we don't see internationalization in purely geographical terms and reductive terms, I will also look for reviewers who can offer a wider assessment, a wider perspective on how your research connects with debates for a global audience. And I do this because it's important for us, but also important for you as an author to be confident that the research is of international relevance. Through reviewers' recommendations, I need to make sure that the final draft can incorporate an awareness of similar studies that have been carried out in wider social kind of cultural contexts. And so this is all part of what we're trying to do throughout the peer review process, throughout the types of the reviewers that we invite to comment on your work, and the detailed feedback that we aim to offer as editors if we are going to invite a revision of your paper after a first round of reviews. So in all these ways, we are keen to stress this idea of international significance as a measure of a good paper, as a measure of a paper that we want to publish in the journal, and as an important element of evaluation in the peer reviewing process itself. So should your paper be accepted, then we as editors continue to work with you. We continue to work with authors at that final draft stage to develop international reflection within the paper, if we feel that it's not been sufficiently addressed earlier in the peer review process. So I would stress again that this isn't about a kind of a geographical reductionism, where the country of study is the primary way in which we assess the idea of internationalization. It's far more to do with allowing authors to reflect on their position within highly unequal and uneven kind of circuits of knowledge production. And it's allowing authors to draw out the wider sociological significance of their work. Really, it's about us trying to foster a truly global sociological imagination that is alive to how individual lives connect with much wider global kind of social practices. And it's an attempt to foster what Doreen Massey, whose picture I've put on the slides here, once kind of termed a truly global sense of place. Even in studies which are grounded in very, very local sites or culturally specific social practices, there must be a kind of an analytical awareness of how these local practices connect with kind of wider international and global trends. I want to say one final thing before passing on to Boe, and that's, as Kaoru's slides make clear, almost half of the papers that we publish in the course of a year come from authors based at a UK university. And we must make clear that not all those authors are British themselves, they're simply based in UK universities. Nonetheless, we do want to, as part of our internationalization strategy, decolonize knowledge production as much as we can. We have to acknowledge that much of the content will always be within UK universities, but we are working to diversify that. And I'd also kind of like to kind of make clear that when we as kind of editors work with authors of UK studies, we try to make sure that it's reflected in the way that the paper is presented, in the way the data is presented, so that we say that this is a study based in the UK rather than that remaining unremarked, as if work in the UK is a standard against which all other studies are positioned. We're very, very aware of that. And this is just a very everyday example of how we try to use the peer review process to deprovincialize British content and to create a more global sociological imagination. Now I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to pass on to Boe, who's going to talk to you about how to write in an international way and why that's important for you as both a reviewer and as an author.
Okay, thanks, Daryl. Good evening, I'm Warwick. As an East Asian researcher, I wish there was an event like today when I began my career. I find sociological review and its internationalization agenda truly welcoming scholars from around the globe. Today, I want to focus on how to write for an international audience and why it is important. In particular, I would like to share how I understand internationalization from both an author and a reviewer perspective. As a researcher from Taiwan, when I submit articles to journal, I'm often asked by reviewers to explain the significance of Taiwan context. It could be frustrating at first, as if the Taiwan context were not important and require further explanation. Soon I realized such question, in fact, is an opportunity for me to explain why my research is relevant for our international community. It allowed me to think through how my research can add new insight into the existing literature. In saying this, we need to ask what I mean by new or original. Is it simply presenting the so-called cultural uniqueness to those who are unfamiliar with Taiwan? I'm afraid it's not good enough if we try to write for an international audience. To bring new insight into the existing literature is to engage with the ongoing major debate that go beyond the local context. The practice of engagement with the international community is essential. Because new idea must be situated in relation to assimilated disciplinary knowledge. The most influential new ideas are often those that most closely follow the old new one. In other words, to be original is to approach new evidence in an old way, and I find it is useful to refine the existing literature through the lens of Taiwan local culture. Rather than being a challenge, the culture significance of Taiwan provide me a real opportunity to open up dialogue and contribute to the academic conversation in our international community. How to write for international audience through culture as an analytical lens? I will use my article, Unpacking the Cultural Paradox of Attentive Care for Institutionalized People, institutionalized people with intellectual disability as example. When I write this article, the first question I ask myself is, what is the cultural significance of institutionalized care in Taiwan? During my fieldwork, when asked for the meaning of good services, most frontline workers use the phrase 用心照顾, putting heart and soul into giving care to describe the ethos of their work, which I call attentive care. Why frontline care workers are willing to go the extra mile in order to provide attentive care? Because it provides moral incentive for them to reframe their devalued practices. How attentive care takes place? The woman worker often use local cultural value in Taiwan, such as the fictive kinship of Confucian care ethic, the charity paradigm, and the Buddhist compassion as resources in negotiating caring practices. What are the cause and cultural paradox of attentive care? This culture-specific caring relation can induce attentive and respectful care in institutional spaces, but also relegate residents to the stigmatized subordination and legitimize the voluntary exploitation of women workers. Nevertheless, by simply presenting the cultural significance of institutionalized care in Taiwan is not enough. I need to further relate my research with the existing debate and unpacking the cultural paradox of attentive care for the international community. This article is in a special issue edited by West, Daryl, and I, and published by Health and Place, a journal that focuses on healthcare geography. Therefore, I need to think how my research is relevant to the literature on geography of culture, disability, and care. First, in response to cultural geography, call for investigating how cultural belief and practices structure the site of healthcare provision, my research shows culture as a dis or enabling processes of doing and undoing careful practices. Second, my research broadened the conceptual horizon by showing how the people-culture place interaction in an East Asian context can contribute to the relational geography of disability. Third, my research contributes to the geography of care literature. It highlights the indispensable role of culture in reconceptualizing good care and careful geography. In critical dialogue with the existing literature, I aim to make the culture significance of Taiwan academically relevant to the international community. My experience of being an East Asian author also informed me as a reviewer. When I review an article, I try my best to facilitate the author publishing across border. Specifically, I encourage authors, particularly those from Anglo-Saxon countries, to culturally contextualize their research in order to better communicate with a wider international community. Also, for international scholars like myself, my worry about being different, yet differences present an opportunity to make a real contribution. I encourage authors to be different, to violate at least some expectation of reader in order to be original and to generate interest. In saying this, interesting research outside of a Western context should not violate too many assumptions or violate core assumption by too much, since doing so was likely to invite psychological rejection by reader and reviewer. Therefore, my job as a reviewer is to ensure the author is aware of relevant debate playing out in the sociological review and the other part of the world, citing the relevant research that go beyond Western context. In so doing, I try to make sure international authors are motivated to read sociological review and submit their research to it. By being culturally responsive and inclusive reviewer, I aim to help the author to build stronger, more meaningful relationship with the international community of sociology, attract a participant of author of all backgrounds from around the globe. Once again, the sociological review is committed to build stronger and meaningful relationship with the international community. We believe that the specific perspective that come from living in a less representative culture can be a clear asset in producing surprising research ideas and ones that are likely to be seen as adding value. We are eager to receive international submission and believe that the quality of research will increase as more manuscripts are obtained from around the globe. We look for your submission and thanks for your listening.
Thank you very much, Boe. Thank you. Thank you all. Now, we're going to move on to the second part, question and answer part of the session. So I would encourage you to type any questions that you have addressed to either any of those kind of presentations into the chat box. But I'm going to start things off by asking each of our panelists, Wes, Kaoru, and Boe, what internationalization means to them specifically. So I don't know, Wes, you're unmuted. Do you want to come in first?
Sure. Thanks, Daryl. Thanks, Boe and Kaoru, for your presentation and to engage with our participants around internationalization. And I think my understanding about internationalization have different stage and different aspects. I think it's important as a sociological review, as a journal, we need to have a internationalization or institutional infrastructure that enable us to develop this internationalization strategy. So this includes developing, for example, an international editorial board where we can draw on expertise from reviewers that have both the subject expertise in relation to sociological imaginations and sociology, as well as general, regional, and area expertise and knowledge. And I understand, as Daryl said, this would be an ideal situation, but most of the time that we also rely on a wider academic contribution from outside the editorial board, that we seek editorial reviewers to review our paper. And also that I think that internationalization is working hand in hand with our idea of EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion. While we're emphasizing the importance of internationalization, it extends our commitment to EDI, that we do not want to be seen as a journal only promote a small cohort of sociologists that are based in the UK. So we welcome contributions and innovative work in sociology that to make intervention theoretically and methodologically to the sociological review. But also that I think that internationalization is not just about adding on some kind of empirical study, as Boe rightly just mentioned in his presentation, but making some kind of theoretical engagement with existing, debate within the literature. So to, produce new knowledge through old methods and engage with some existing knowledge in the field. So that is my understanding about internationalization.
Thank you, Wes. Kaoru, do you want to come in next?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I really agree with Wes, and especially as an editorial manager, it's really important to have a kind of infrastructure that could enable to have our internationalization strategy. And my understanding of internationalization is kind of building up inclusive and sustainable community for everyone. So I think it doesn't make sense if we could increase the submission from international author tentatively. I understand some people would like to have a publication to the well-known and prestigious journal, and also as a kind of publishing side, also we would like to have more international authors. But if that communication is just one-off, it doesn't make sense. And as an editorial manager, I often receive quite positive feedback from authors, and what makes me very happy is even for those whose papers are rejected, but still they give me feedback and saying our reviewing process has been very helpful and meaningful for them. So I think it would be nice if we could bring some authors who submitted paper join us as a reviewer, and also at a different occasion, some people who reviewed the paper as a reviewer can submit or paper as an author. And so I think if we could build up such kind of positive circulation or chain reaction in an international way, that is kind of something we want to realize through this internationalization, where people can share the same value and practice and continue such sustainable community. So yeah, that is something I understand. So what I can do as my job is now currently we are building reviewing guideline with Wes, so that anyone who have less experience for the reviewing for international journal and who might feel hesitant to accept our invitation, but so that we can encourage such people to come into our community, we try to build up such guideline and submission guideline. Such infrastructure is really important to make our this kind of internationalization possible.
Thank you, Caro. It's such an important point you make about how, actually, Boe mentioned it as well, how you can become better as an author yourself if you review, because of that kind of iterative process of just seeing how other kind of people make their arguments, learning from it, and kind of thinking about how you might apply some of those lessons to your own research. Boe, did you want to come in?
Yeah, and as my presentation just talk about, for me, internationalization is about knowledge translation, and we don't lose and try our best not to get lost in translation. By this, I mean that as a East Asian researcher, I try to translate, try to make this culture significant of my research relevant to the international community. At the same time, I hope authors, particularly from Anglo-Saxon country, they can culturally contextualize their research and make it more relevant for the wider international community. So for me, internationalization is to make your research communicate better with wider community.
Again, I absolutely agree. It's a really important point, and I think it's something that we try to work with maybe authors, maybe from the UK, just to not take things for granted in terms of how politics, how the social, how cultural practice works in the UK, and actually really explain and kind of try and communicate better. I like the way that you phrased that, Boe. It's about communication, really, isn't it? And kind of bringing out the specificity and richness of your individual case studies, but really taking the time to communicate that to a wider audience can really help with kind of really outlining and making more precise your kind of contribution. I'm just going to take a look. Right, we have a question in the chat. I'm just going to read it out. So I'm Elisa, a researcher from India. Thank you for this interesting dialogue that is demystifying the editorial process of journals and iterating the importance of internationalization. Please do also shed light. Shed light on the time frame taken for a research article to go through the entire process from initial submission to acceptance. Maybe I can ask Kaoru to come in on that first, and then maybe Wes and myself can say something more.
Hi, thank you, Elisa, for your question. So I cannot say exact time frame, but because it really depends on the case, and especially we've been facing really difficult situation in the past few years due to the COVID. So workload for the reviewer and the editor has been really mounting. So, but in general, it could take around 1 year from the first submission until the once if so. Usually the paper is processed for second round review or third round. So it's not happen just with the first submission and the paper is accepted. So I would say it could take at least 1 year from the first submission until the publication. But sometimes it could be take just for the first round of the review, it could take 6 or 7 months. So we try to shorten this time, but again, it really depends on the situation. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with Kaoru. There isn't a specific number of how many months or how long it takes to go through this peer review process. But as a journal, we are committed to, process all the submission as quickly, as efficient as possible. So internally, we actually have a policy regarding, the first round, the first, like a screening of the paper. If we are decided to send the paper out for peer review, we initially make a decision within the first 4 weeks. And also, if it's a desk reject, we will make a decision within the first 4 weeks. And we are, it's likely that the first round of peer review would take around 3 or 4 months to get the reviewers' feedback, because as you understand that, at the moment, academics around the world are all facing difficult challenges in terms of their workload, in terms of their commitment in relation to teaching and research. So we really, rely on our contributor, our reviewers, our editorial board member for their generosity in terms of spending time engaging with our author, our papers, and to give their constructive comments. And this process usually takes about 3 or 4 months to get our first round of peer review, and then our editor will make some editorial decision based on the reviewer's comment, whether it is a reject after the first round of peer review, or we ask for major or minor revision invite you for a resubmission. So that takes about another 3 or 4 months, for you to rewrite and resubmit. And then we will make a decision once you resubmit the paper about, okay, whether it's, we need to send it out for further review, or we can make a decision based on your revision and your report to outline what you have made change on your new submission. So this is a general process of peer review.
Boe, did you want to come in? Was that you raising your hand?
No. Sorry,
okay.
did I?
All right. Yeah, I don't need to add anything to Wes and Kaoru's full explanations. Just to say that when the reviews do come in, I have to say from my experience of working on other journals, I'm very, very impressed by the depth of consideration that our reviewers typically give to papers. So whether it's a reject, whether it's a proceed to the next round of revision, whether it's acceptance, one of the things that I hope you would get as an author submitting to the sociological review is really kind of well-considered feedback that is constructive on your work. Can I ask a question to the panelists? And we might be talking around this subject already, but what they think the barriers are to editors ensuring internationalization within the review process. I don't know, Wes, do you want to come in first? Barriers.
Thanks, Daryl. Yes, a lot of barrier, a lot of drivers as well about internationalization, and I think the biggest challenge for us is peer review. Because we want to ensure that, for example, papers submitted from outside the UK, we'd like to ensure that our reviewer are also familiar with the context, the social cultural context of the research, So, so that is a question, and also this is a challenge that I keep asking myself, whether it is necessary to invite a reviewer with area expertise, because I understand for some academics, they don't really, for example, like sociologists, they don't really want their paper to be reviewed by area scholars. So there is some kind of dilemma that we need to be careful about, whether we'd like to invite area expertise to review a paper that is about, for example, like gender, sexuality, but they might not have, insufficient expertise in relation to gender studies, for example. Yeah, so that is a challenge for, I think, for most of our editors in terms of inviting reviewers.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. Wei, did you want to comment on this particular question?
I'm not really. Yeah.
That's all right.
I think Wes has explained quite a lot, and I fully agree. And I think to be culturally responsive and culturally inclusive is very important. Perhaps I can answer the next question about a reviewer.
That's all right. Okay, thanks, Wei. Kaoru, did you want to say anything from your perspective in terms of the barriers?
No, actually, I'm not in a position to make any editorial judgment, so I think I have nothing to say, and rather I would like to hear your opinion, Daryl, on this question.
Okay. Well, yeah, my opinion I recognize the dilemma that Wes has brought up. There is a tension there in terms of we don't want to reduce the novelty and the contribution of a paper simply to being an empirical study of something in a different part of the world than we've previously published in. So I do, as I said in my in my talk, we do try and look for reviewers with different expertise. So people who are kind of specialists in the wider kind of area of study, who can kind of see how actually this will make a wider contribution to that sub-discipline sometimes of sociology. I do sometimes think it is important where there's a very specific empirical case being investigated, that there should be somebody within the reviewer kind of like pool that can actually verify something about the specifics, the empirical examples. But it's a tension and it's a balance. And it's also actually the barrier is getting enough reviewers to submit their reviews, especially in a timely manner, because reviewers are inundated with requests for work in terms of their workload in their institutional lives. And so reviewing a paper for the Sociological Review, as for any other journal, is additional to that workload. So that probably is one of the barriers. It's structural in quality rather than necessarily linked to particular kind of regional kind of context. I've got a question in chat. Okay, thank you very much for addressing such an important issue. This is from Dilvin. My question is about the number of accepted papers for publication in Kaoru's presentation. There are very limited papers accepted from the Global South. Is there a particular reason for this?
I can say something about this. So each paper, when you submit, for example, a manuscript to the journal, we generally ask you to fill in a form, online form, asking to justify the reason of submitting to the journal. And I realized that, while I'm reviewing all those papers, sometimes paper from outside the UK, and there's sometimes people just simply say that, okay, their study is unique, people haven't been study this issue, for example, in China or in Taiwan or in Japan, and just simply making an empirical justification about, okay, this study just adding on to the existing debate by talking about a case from China or the case from Taiwan or Japan. I think in this case, this is not sufficient enough to justify, why your paper is suitable for the journal. And I think that, as Daryl mentioned in his presentation that some people are not really engaged with our manifesto. And I think our manifesto states very clearly about, the ethos of our journal is to open up the discussion of social life through sociological imagination rather than close down. So we are not going to actually, provide a solution or offer some kind of research report. We would like to, open up debate, and the paper should be suitable for a general audience. So sometimes the paper might be written for a specialist, journal, which sometimes we cannot accept because it is too specialized and it's not good for a general audience. So our aim is to publish work that is, suitable for a general readership.
I think I'd come in and just echo that. That's often one of the reasons that that stop papers from getting published, because they are narrowly speaking to a sub-discipline. And so sometimes that is to do with, as Wes says, this is just an example of maybe childhood studies research, but in the context of, I don't know, Taiwan or something. Similarly, it could be about kind of a very specific paper that is really more suited to a sociology of health and illness sub-discipline. When we make decisions and when reviewers read our papers for the sociological review, they do expect a much wider general readership to be kind of addressed in the research. And that's probably the main reason, I think, empirically, why that is. And can I just say one last thing about the kind of the reason for publishing in the sociological review? Sometimes a lot of readers simply repeat the abstract in that. Can I ask authors not to do that? Just answer. It doesn't have to be a very, very long answer, but this is a kind of an opportunity for you as an author to directly speak to the editors, not to the reviewers, but to the editors, and convince us of the fit within the journal. So do take that opportunity rather than simply repeating an abstract. We've got another question in chat. How often does a paper from an undergraduate researcher get accepted? Kaoru, I don't know if we collect data on the career stage of a researcher. I don't know that we would necessarily make a value judgment based on that.
No, so we don't monitor exact number of how many early careers researchers have submitted, but as far as I know, I haven't seen any papers accepted that is submitted by undergraduate researcher. And actually, we have no submission from undergraduate researcher, but we don't disk reject paper because the paper is submitted by undergraduate. That never happens. So it just all the paper goes through the same reviewing process. That is something I just really would like to highlight.
Okay, thank you. We have one last question which I wanted to ask all our panelists, which is what the most challenging aspect of reviewing papers outside of the cultural context that you know best. Wei said you said you might come in on this.
Yeah, for me as a reviewer, I often review paper, not my expertise or outside of my comfort zone. It can be a challenge, but at the same time, I find it's very exciting because when I review paper that about gender and sexuality, I kind of get bored. But when I review paper is outside of my expertise, or the case in Poland or in Germany, in the Netherlands, it'll be exciting for me. It's not when I do the reviewer, it's more like do a mini project. I try to explore a little bit, the different cultural context of different, the value and how they understand, for example, pandemic in Germany, in Netherlands. And through the review process, although it's difficult because I have to, to remind the author to cite the relevant research. So in other words, I have to review or go through do a bit research at the same time. But at the same time, I find myself, it's very, very beneficial for me as a reviewer, because when I do the review, when I reviewing the paper, actually I learn from the review process. I learn from the author. I learn from different cultural contexts. So it can be a challenge for me, but I also find it exciting. And I also find it's very engaging and very exciting. This is why I love to review paper, particularly those outside of my comfort zone.
Thank you very much. And I think from an editor's perspective, those reviews can be extremely valuable because they really get to the heart of how well the paper is communicating. This goes back to something we talked about earlier, so that it's not about communicating to a rather kind of small group of specialist researchers. It's really helpful to have those external perspectives. Did anyone else want to come in on that question of the most challenging aspects of reviewing papers? Wes?
Thanks, Daryl. And I think for me, it's not necessarily challenging. It's actually interesting to find out the interconnection of, social life in different social cultural contexts, actually thinking about the internationalization of social life happening in different parts of the world, rather than in isolation, but we can actually see the connection. People engage with particular sociological concept, for example, like class, gender, but also trying to tease out the meanings of, how class is being lived out and how genders is being practiced in different social cultural contexts. I think it's quite interesting through reviewing the paper, you can see that kind of connection, but also can see the potential of making theoretical interventions from, local studies.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. I am aware that it's about 1 hour, just over 1 hour since we all started kind of talking and discussing this important topic. It really is something that is integral to what we want to achieve in the journal, to celebrate a wider diversity and to kind of globalize sociological imagination. So please do keep an eye out. As Kaoru kind of trailed, there will be calls out for editorial board members. They tend to happen, I think I'm right in saying, every year anyway. So keep an eye out, if not this year, then in the future. Can I just flag again that there will be 3 more webinars led by members of the editorial staff. Next Tuesday, there's going to be one on behind the scenes at the Sociological Review monograph. The week after that, we're back to a Monday seminar with a webinar on academic judgment. And then the final one is talking through how to respond to reviewer feedback as a contributing author. So thank you very much. If there's anything that people want to say immediately, then we'll keep an eye on the chat. But otherwise, thank you very, very much for attending this webinar.